All right, I think we're ready. We are ready to go live. First and foremost, thank you for making the time today to go through what I hope will be a very promising webinar series called the Law School Admissions Secrets to Success. As you can see, I'm sharing my screen right there. And I will go through a lot of information in a very short period of time. We've got about an hour together, so I want to make sure that we are as productive as possible and cover a lot of ground on this webinar. We're going to be dividing it into two webinars because there's so much to cover. I can't even tell you. There's just a lot going on for the law school process. So let us get started, and I want to make sure that I have my comments up, and I know I'm going to have some help from my team. So let's get busy. Okay, so first and foremost, thank you again for joining. Again, this is part one, and I want to give you a little bit of a background of who I am. So I started Right Track in 2008. This is the company that's obviously conducting this process. So I started the company in 2008. And in terms of my own academic background, as you can see there, I went to UCLA to do my undergraduate degree. I then went to Berkeley Law School, where I graduated in 2008 and was on the law review there as well as a number of other things that we can actually talk about during the course of this webinar, because there are some incredible things that I was able to pull off while I was in law school that really allowed me to maximize my success, both as a student leader, and so forth. So I think there's some really interesting insights that I'm going to be very happy to share with you. While I was in law school, I took some time off and I went to do my master's in Cambridge in England. I did a master's in international relations. And then finally, I did my master's at Harvard, my second master's, 10 years after I graduated from almost 10 years after I graduated from law school, and did the master's in public administration at the Harvard Kennedy School, where this picture was taken. So I've had a really long run at the academic circuit, about 9 years of schooling. And through this process is really what got me thinking about Right Track and the admissions process in general. So let me give you guys a quick background about the law school admissions landscape, or just the law school landscape in general. And I think these are some important statistics to kind of keep in mind as you go through it. First and foremost, there's about 198 ABA accredited law schools. ABA stands for the American Bar Association. And those are schools whereby when you graduate from them, you can automatically take the bar exam in your respective state. Now, there are a lot of other schools that are not ABA accredited. And I believe if they're not ABA accredited, you have to take another type of examination before you can qualify to take the bar exam. I don't necessarily know the nitty gritty of it, because our focus is more on the top law schools, or at least the top 100 law schools. Also, there's about 30,000 people who apply every year to law school, and it's increasing. It kind of ebbs and flows, but generally it has an upward trend, except I think during some years it went down slightly, but there definitely seems to be an upward trend in terms of law school. And the average cost of law school, I mean tuition, I don't mean total law cost, but I mean tuition cost per year is around $49,000, which is a lot of money given the fact that your housing is probably going to cost you at least another $20,000. Your living expenses, your books, everything all in is going to be closer to $100,000 per year. So there's a lot that you have to consider when doing the law degree, including the fact that it's 3 years and somewhere around $300,000. So it's a big, big decision to make. So when making this decision, I want you to kind of think about a couple of things. Here are some questions I want you to ask yourself. Okay? Why do I want to pursue law? This question is fundamental. You're going to have to answer this in the law school application. So the sooner you think about it, the better. If not law school, what are the other options? Are there other graduate programs that you're interested in, or professional options that you could pursue? When I was applying to law school, honestly, I didn't feel like I had much choice. I graduated with a history degree and a minor in political science at UCLA. And I didn't really know where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do. So I felt law school probably was the best position for me. And the only way I had a better chance at understanding is that I did work at a law firm for about 2 years before I attended law school. So that 2-year gap was very, very instructive for me, because what I was able to do was I was able to get a better sense of whether or not I wanted to go to law school. I saved some money in the process, and I was able to get good letters of recommendation out of it. So if anybody has a question about taking gap years between undergraduate and law school and so forth, feel free to ask, because I definitely did. So that should be instructive. Now, ask yourself other questions. If my path is law, is this based on interests, skills, market? Why am I pursuing this path? And how do my skills, my interests, and the market align with this pursuit? Do I appreciate the rigor of law school? Again, it's 5 years. And the state bar, which half my gray hair came from the state bar exam. It's no joke. Am I ready to take on the significant debt and 3 years of studies, right? Am I, will I become redundant? This is a very important question. And we're going to cover that question in part 2 of the process of the webinar series. So will legal AI kick me out of a job? Will I have a job afterwards, right? And what skills do I need to develop to really stand out as a law school student, right? What do I have? What do I need to develop, right? So these are some really important questions to ask yourself as you go through this process. And these are some of the actions to take given these questions. I would seek the advice of a pre-law advisor if your school has one, to kind of find out where you stand, what are your chances. I would fine-tune your competencies in terms of research, writing, heavy classes. So kind of double down on those, especially if you're a sophomore or junior and you can take more classes, right? Do some background research on law schools and the market trends in terms of what areas you want to go to. Gain some practical legal experience. I told you guys I worked at a law firm initially before applying to law school, and when I applied, and so forth. So that definitely helped me there. Audit some law school classes. If you guys are near a major law school, you guys can go in there and say, hey, listen, I'm thinking about law school. Is this a good time for me to go, right? Network with law students and alum, right? I think that's also very important. That was a huge help for me. Take a law school boot camp, right? Whereby if there are some schools and so forth that are doing that, so you can take a boot camp. And even once you've done all these things, which give you a lot of background and makes your decision a lot more informed, do a SWOT analysis of your background, your strengths, what stands out. Maybe it's your grades, your weaknesses. Maybe it could potentially be your LSAT, your opportunities, taking an LSAT tutor or so forth, and your threats, like when do you plan to apply? Is your profile impacted? Like a lot of people have a similar profile to you. What can you do to really kind of distinguish yourself? So do a SWOT analysis of your candidacy. This is something that Right Track does. We have something called Law School Admissions Assessment Program, which essentially gives you an overview of where you stand and what are your chances of admission. So this is something I definitely would consider you thinking about as you go through law school. It shouldn't be a haphazard, I guess I have nothing else to do, I'll go to law school. Okay, here are the top law schools. Again, a little bit of a reality check. You could see the median LSAT in the 70s. As out of the top 20 law schools, the median LSAT is somewhere about 170, 169 probably overall. So it's a very high LSAT score required. Medium GPA looks around like a 3.8, looks like the average GPA, right? Acceptance rates range anywhere from in the top 20 schools, somewhere between 4%, look, Stanford is 4%, all the way down to, I think, what is that? Wake Forest is somewhere close to 15%. So it's, again, those, if you want to go to a top 20 law school, these are the kind of scores that you're going to need to really get into these 20 law schools, these top 20. I'll tell you this, when I applied, Berkeley, as you can see right here, was number 6, right underneath Columbia. Duke wasn't even up there, so I don't know how Duke and Chicago became such top-rated law schools. Good for them, because usually it's been Stanford, it's usually been Yale, Stanford, Harvard, Columbia, NYU, followed by Penn, have typically been the top 6, and Berkeley was right there after them. Now Berkeley's dropped to 15th, but still you can see the LSAT's a 169. I ended up getting a 155. So in the end of the day, I had a poor LSAT score. I had a GPA that was high, was somewhere around here. So I had a high GPA, but a very poor LSAT score, which really gave me a very low chance of admission. But again, it kind of, as I said, all worked out in the end. And there's what? 7,200 applying to UCLA, 6,000, almost 500 to Berkeley. So you can see the number of applicants applying to these schools. Typically, it's the same group of people. I'd say total applicants here, probably about 10,000 applying to the top 20 law schools. And then the rest are applying to the others. All right. let's jump into how to prepare your profile. Now, so I'm gonna have to drink a little water as well. We're covering a lot of ground here, guys. So law schools want to see someone who's well-rounded, both with IQ and EQ. So I want you to keep these 5 C's in mind. Collaborative, that's the teamwork and the leadership. Capable, someone who's done research, strong communication skills, strong critical thinking skills, right? The core skills. Somebody who's compassionate, who's done volunteering, community service, somebody who's got a sense of empathy. Conscientious, someone who has high level of integrity and ethical background, right? Which is super important for law, the profession, and law students in general. And someone who's committed, shows strong work ethic and driven. They don't want to admit students that are going to quit law school halfway through. All right. Spending time on your story. So let's just say we talked about these are the key qualities that the law schools are looking for. So how do I manifest them? How do I bring them to life? And this is how you do it. There's the academic component, right? Because we just talked about the capable, research, communications, critical thinking. So you've got the academic component, writing, analytical, oral advocacy, research. So you want to spend time, what I call living your story. This is especially for people who are applying in a year or two, right? So you have more opportunity to make these changes, to do these things, right? But if you're applying now, we're in June and you're applying in August, September, you may not have all the time in the world to do all of these things, but you can still do some of them. So we've got the academics. So you want to flex your academic skills. That's the IQ. Life experiences, challenge you faced, hardships you've overcome, and how you overcame them, because that forms part of your story. Personal development, the publications, public speaking, civic engagement, different things you've done to improve yourself as an individual. Extracurricular activities, right? That shows that you have teamwork, that you're well-rounded, that you know, and so forth. That's your sports, student government, debate, identity groups, all that stuff, right? Volunteer activities. Remember, we talked about that when we spoke about compassion and volunteering and service. So here is where you can showcase that. Professional experiences. This is where you can showcase your commitment, right? And as I said, collaborative comes into sports, capable comes into academics, compassion comes into volunteer, commitment comes into work and the professional experiences you have, if you have. Conscientious really needs to come through the personal development, you know, the professional experiences, just to show your level of integrity. Okay, guys? So keep these 6 things in mind. These are 6 buckets that you constantly fill over time to help you live the story that you are going to write about, that we're going to talk about, especially in webinar 2, when we start talking about how to write your personal statement and your other components of the application. All right. So now that we've told you a little bit of background of about what the schools are looking for and how to actually manifest them, here's how you collect all of them. And we spoke a little bit about that SWOT analysis. Remember way in the beginning when we spoke about how you should evaluate yourself as a student and if law school is right for you. So this is kind of like some things I want you to kind of think about. There is for the 3 ways that you collect and gather all that information is really right here in your resume and the lists that you create. So in your resume, you're going to talk about the extracurriculars, you're going to talk about the volunteer, you're going to talk about the activities, you're going to talk about the professional experiences, your academics, honors, research, publications, the brag list, which really is a document you put together so that you can then showcase it to your recommenders. And we'll talk about that. And again, your life experiences. You can write down as you go through living your story, all the different things that you've achieved and how we can then bake those into an application. Other ways of gathering your data is putting it in a SWOT analysis as well. And then also the law school application tracker, which we can provide for you. And we'll talk about that towards the end of this session. So here with a law school tracker, you're going to essentially write the school, why you're interested, where it ranks, where it's located, what are its requirements, all that kind of stuff. And you kind of track each one of those components as you can see there. So that's how you gather the data. So if I've told you what the schools look for, I've told you how to manifest it. Here's then how you take all those manifestations, all those experiences, and you put them down in paper and you keep them on standby, getting ready for the application process itself. All right. So now that we've talked about how to prepare your profile, let's jump into how to assemble your application. So here are the key components of the law school process. Okay, very important. You've got LSAC, which is where you register your transcripts, your recommendations, all that stuff. Your transcripts, which you have to collect and upload to LSAC. Taking the LSAT or the GRE as a standardized test. Basically selecting which law schools reach target and safety, and we'll talk about that. Financial aid, figuring out how you're going to pay for law school and putting the materials together. The core materials, personal statement, diversity data, addendum, and resume, which we're going to talk about. Letters of recommendation, and then the school-specific essays. Okay, some schools are really asking why our school specifically, and so forth. So you want to have answers to that. All right. Now that we've talked about the LSAC process, let's dive into it a little bit. And here's the LSAC process. So step one is you create an LSAC account so that you can start tracking and going through all the documentations. Then after you create, you register your LSAT test dates and on the LSAC system, or if you do the GRE, you go to ets.org. Okay, so you first is create LSAC, then you register for the standardized test, then you sign up for the credentialing assembly service so that they have all your GPA and everything there because they need to calculate it. Then inform the law school to find out the candidate referral system. And that really is, if you want the schools to contact you based off your background, then the idea is that you want to register the candidate referral system as well. All right, let me also put this here. So then we have you request your letters of recommendation and upload it to LSAC in order of preference, because sometimes you would have 1, 2, 3 letters of recommendation. And so in this case, you want to have those and you want to upload them in terms of who you think are the best, because some schools will take 2, some will take 3. You don't want to throw all 3 there. If you want to make sure that the top 2 letters are ordered in 1 and 2 so that every school gets those top 2. And the third one goes to the schools that requested, but you don't get the third one, which may be very good while you have an excellent one. And because you misordered it, the excellent one is third and the very good one is second. If a school takes 2 only, then you may end up sacrificing your excellent one for the very good one. So you want to make sure that you order them in the order that's most important to you. And that written the best. You want to decide if you're going to apply early action or decision or regular admission, and then also decide, then actually put the application together. So then you decide which round and then put the application and submit. I always tell people, really, it should be no later than Thanksgiving, but I put here the first week of December to give you even a little bit more time on the process. What you don't want is you don't want to rush your application so much and submit it by October, and it's really half-baked. It could have been a lot better if you had spent more time. So spend the time you need, but don't spend too much time because the enemy of good is perfect. All right. Now, in terms of picking the right law school, okay, here are some things to kind of really think about. Okay, give me a second. Sorry, allergies are killing me. Okay, so a lot of this is very intuitive, nothing new and crazy here, but these are the top things you should be thinking about as you go through the law school admissions process to pick the right school. And I say right because there is no right. There's just, one's better than the other that fits you better. So you can see it right there. Location in the countryside like Cornell, or in the city like NYU, is the location in terms of close to where you eventually want to live and practice. Like, would you rather go to Vanderbilt because it's ranked higher than UC Hastings, or do you plan to work in San Francisco so that Hastings is a better option, right? The size and the type of the law school, right? A big school like Harvard versus a small school like Yale. Do you want to go to a private law school like USC or a public law school like UCLA? Reputation, top 10 school, mid-tier program, right? Concentration, intellectual property tax, what concentration is the school known for, right? Resources, the clinics they have, the research they have, right? As you can see, the tuition, the costs, the campus vibe, diversity, student journals, organizations, faculty, what are their qualifications, expertise, accessibility? Are they really hard to access, right? The network, the strength of the alumni, in terms of local, international, maybe you want to work internationally. How good is that school internationally, right? Career development, job placement, bar passage rates, what are those, right? These are all important factors in the process, okay, to kind of think about in picking the school. And now what are the factors that you don't want to focus on in picking schools? Like what are the factors or how not to pick the right law school? Let me put it that way. Focusing only on Harvard Law because you say to yourself, Harvard or bust, right? You don't ever research the campus or visit it, right? Not even a virtual tour. That's a no-no. You do want to do your research before you go to that school because you're going to be there for 3 years, okay? Applying only to a certain concentration or professor because maybe you're like, I only want to do IP, and the next thing you know, you decide, actually, I don't want to do IP. I want to do, I don't know, business law, and that school doesn't have a good concentration of that. So you want to make sure you don't go to a school only because of a certain concentration or a certain professor because the professor could take a sabbatical. Attend for financial aid only. Oh, I got a full ride at, I don't know, Loyola Marymount, but I got into Harvard. Well, I think if you go to Harvard, you're probably going to get much better jobs afterwards, potentially, and therefore it's going to pay back in dividends. Who cares if they gave you financial aid? Okay? Following others like your friends and family. Oh, my cousin went to whatever school, I'm going to follow them. Or my family went there, I'm going to follow them, right? I don't think that's a good way of thinking about it. 1 second. Thank you. Sorry, I'm saying it to myself. Excuse me. Not diversifying. Reach, target, and safety schools, right? That's a problem. If you only apply to reach schools like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, that's not going to help you. You really want to diversify your application pool. You want to have reach schools, at least 2 or 3 of them, and that's where you have a 0 to 15% chance of admission. You want target schools. As you can see here, the number of applicants. So here, somewhere along the lines of like 4 to 6 target schools, maybe like your UCLAs, your USCs, and so forth, your Michigans and Virginias, and then you have your safety schools. Maybe that's going to be like slightly on the the top 30, not the top 30, but like the 50 to 30 schools or 30 to 50 schools. That would be the safety schools. Obviously, all depends on your GPA and your LSAT and so forth. Okay, but this graph, I want you to think about it because it's very, very important in terms of how you should be thinking about the different schools. All right, now let's jump ahead to some of the key components of the application. So remember when we talked about the application process, we said that there's a personal statement, a diversity statement, an addendum, and a resume. So here are the different components of the application. Let's quickly go through the resume. With the resume, I want you to kind of brainstorm everything you've ever accomplished in university and after graduation, if applicable, right? I want you to list it all and definitely the things that make you stand out, not just your academics, but things really about you. And that's what we talked about with gathering your data. Also, I want you to note down experiences that really demonstrated the key components of what the law schools look for. Things like initiative, analytical skills, compassion, uniqueness, advocacy, leadership, all these things. Also, you should be thinking about the different aspects of your the different components, of the resume. So you have the education and activities is how you always start, then your professional experiences if applicable, then your volunteer experiences, then your extracurricular activities, and then your interests and skills. And then finally, any other possible section that relates to you. Publications, if you have them, certificates and licenses, if you have them, speaking engagements, if you have them, so that you can showcase all the different aspects of who you are. So that's really the way that I would divide up the resume. Education activities, professional, volunteer, extracurriculars that are not academically related, right? Because you don't want to repeat them. But things that you've done outside of school, if applicable. If not, you don't have to include them here. You can include it here and really kind of keep it as its own standalone. If you have a ton of activities after, then you can put them here. Unique interests and skills. I think this is really interesting, especially if you don't use a mechanism that really makes you more, makes you more, makes you unique. You don't want to say I like reading or traveling. You want things that really kind of make you stand out. Okay. All right. All right. Let's put this here. Okay. Now let's quickly talk about the addendum structure. So we've now talked about the give me a second. Yeah. Now that we've talked about the in terms of the addendum super important, super important. And the way I want you to think about it is ICE. Okay. That's the mnemonic I want you to think about. Your first section is really about the introduction, then the context, then the education and learning experience. And here's where you would actually use this structure to really bring this out. Things that where you need it: a low LSAT, GRE, poor GPA, a gap in your education, medical condition that may have impacted your studies, personal issues, right? Legal issues. And here I'll give you two examples of where things kind of come to life. A low LSAT GRE, here's an example. Studied in a foreign education system. I performed poorly on the SAT. I had a prior diagnosis. These are examples of how to explain your a low LSAT or GRE. A low GPA explanation, maybe too many activities, poor time management when you started school. Another example would be you played varsity sports, you couldn't manage your time, you worked full time, you took care of loved ones during college. Those are some good examples of how to tackle that part of the process. And let's say if you use an LSAT, you say introduction, I'm writing to describe why I'm writing this addendum to discuss my LSAT or my poor LSAT score, and that I want to improve it, right? And then I think what you want to do and say, excuse me, I'm writing to describe and discuss my LSAT in this addendum and why it should not, and to explain why I got a poor LSAT score. Then under context, you explain, because I'm not very good at standardized testing. I had a weak SAT score, and I've never been able to really get into SATs or the LSAT or what have you. You should explain, not make excuses. And then finally saying, based off of this, what I learned about myself is perseverance, working hard, double downing on my application. And I'm fairly confident that my GPA speaks better than my LSAT in terms of my ability to succeed. Something like that, right? So that's what you should be thinking about. When I wrote my addendum is one of the most important parts of my application, because I was able to really be able to kind of explain why my LSAT was poor. Okay. All right. Letters of recommendation. Some quick things to think about here. So what is it? You guys, I think, know. I don't think I have to really kind of spell that out, but the idea is that it provides a subjective assessment of your profile that is outside your capability. It's really just for the schools themselves, right? So I think that's super important to think about, is that you want to do it because it provides yet another reaffirmation to what you have in the application to showcase how great you are, okay? You should submit 2 to 3 months in advance to ensure the quality and the timely submission, so that the person doesn't feel pressured and feels like you're kind of screwing them over by giving them very little time, okay? Who should you be asking? An academic, a volunteer, extracurriculars like a coach, a club advisor, supervisor, mentor if it was at a school, right? Or a current student alum. Those are not going to be as powerful. In fact, those could be supplementary letters of recommendation. You should be focusing on really academics. At least have 1 of 2 to be academic or 2 of 3 to be academic. And then the other one can be from one of the other areas. Don't ask a friend. Don't ask someone you're not 100% sure will support you, and really write a damn good letter. And don't ask a VIP over a cheerleader, right? If you have a cheerleader that really has your back, go with them over someone who just may be the president of the school or a professor, but doesn't know you at all, versus maybe even like an adjunct professor versus a tenured faculty that could write you a much better one. It's always better to have stronger letters of rec from someone than one that was written by someone who's famous. That's very important. Okay, how to ask them. Here's a couple of things I want you to think about. If you can do it in person, do it in person, right? That's super important, okay? So make sure that you can do it in person, and make sure they're accessible. If they are going to meet you in person, that's a great thing. If they don't want to meet you and then you email them and they're not responding, and you email them and they're not responding, that's the problem. I would be a little bit weary. and I would try to figure out someone else because you don't want them not to submit it. Also, so you have here, provide any material. This is the brag sheet that we spoke about, right? And that's where you can really talk about who you are and what you've done. And you provide that brag sheet to the recommender, who then can submit it to, who then can internalize it and include it in their recommendation letter to you. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of recommenders will use something like ChatGPT to write the recommendation if they don't have time. And so what you want to do is if you provide them with a brag sheet that they're cool with you providing, then they could essentially take your brag sheet, pop it into ChatGPT, and that would help them write the letter of recommendation. And it would be so in tune with what you've actually done rather than things that have no bearing on you. And that would make your letter stronger. I don't know if recommenders are doing that, but that's one good reason to have a brag sheet is because it can allow them to just copy paste it and then allow them to produce it versus them having no frame of reference about you and then writing a very mediocre letter. That's very general. Provide them with your resume, a draft personal statement if you have one. Also provide them with a format of what they require, though LSAC should pretty much tell them. And then politely follow up with them by email and thank them after they've submitted it because, again, they went out of their way to help you with this process. Okay. Now that we've talked about the resume, we've talked about the addendum, okay, we've talked about letters of recommendation. Let's quickly talk about, in terms of all the components, let's quickly talk about the LSAT versus the GRE. I don't want to get too bogged down because every time I talk about the LSAT, I get wheezy because it makes me feel I got PTSD from it, from how crazy that exam was for me personally. But again, LSAT, as you can imagine, is only for law school. It's not for any other school. It's shorter than the GRE. It's 2.5 hours. They shortened it in the last, I think, year or so because they removed the whole section of it. They removed games, as you may now know, and now they doubled down on logical reasoning. They have 2 sections. Back in the day, they also did. And they have 1 reading comp section and 1 experimental. When we did it, we used to have 3 sections, 3 sections, break, 2 sections. Now I believe you'll have 2 sections, break, 2 sections, and then your writing section at the end. It's all digital now. Back then when we did it, it was written. Now it's all digital. So just some things to keep in mind. And also it's offered 8 times a year. When we did it before, it was only February, June, October, and December. So now you guys have it in 8 times a year. So it gives you more options. And also there's another component, I believe, unless they've changed this, where you can check your score. And if you don't like it, then you can cancel it. With us, we couldn't do that. We had to pretty much bite the bullet, but you guys get to enjoy that privilege. Now, the GREs apply for all grad programs, which is a con because if you apply with the GRE, the school is going to think you're not completely dedicated to law and you're applying to a variety of programs. So that may not help you. It's 3 hours and 45 minutes long. Analytical reading, writing, got this quantitative reasoning, which I hated and I didn't do well in. So I'm not a math guy. And I think because I'm not a math guy, I probably wouldn't take the GRE over the LSAT. You can take paper to write on to do formulas, but it's all done digitally. You can save and return to specific questions. I think the LSAT does this now. I'm not sure, but that was great because then you can kind of like save it, go back. I mean, do a bunch of questions and go back to it and just reread it and so forth. As of 2024, 94 schools take the GRE. When this, I think a couple of years back, it was only in the 20s. So it's really growing exponentially. But still, if I had the choice, if I was really good at reading, really good at English, and very good at just kind of the thinking of the LSAT, even if I was great at the GRE, I would rather you get a 165 in the LSAT than get a 310 in the GRE. I don't know if it's out of, I think it's out of 320 maybe. So maybe if you get a 300, I don't think that would override getting a solid score in the LSAT. I think the LSAT is still preferred by most schools. Just something to think about as you go through the process. Okay, quick on the financial aid. There's a couple of areas. I kind of put them into these groupings. We've got free funds, which are going to be your grants, state, federal, merit-based, right? Things you never have to pay back. And oftentimes it's not really tied like a scholarship with strings attached. Free funds, I don't know, family support, maybe that's considered free. My family helped me when it came to my rent. Personal savings, again, I took a year off. or 2 years off between law school, or a year and a half, I guess. And that allowed me to save a little bit. So when I started law school, I had money as well. Funds with strings attached, those are your scholarships. But some schools, when you apply early decision, are providing funding as well. So something to think about, that if you get into that school, the string attached is that if you apply early decision, you're committed to that school, but then they help you out by providing you with funding, which is great. There's private organizations, but they may want you to come back and work with them. There's community foundations, but you have to qualify for them. So again, it makes it a little bit more tough for the scholarship side, especially for law schools. A lot of people graduate and do well. All right. Funds for repayment, need-based or private loans, right? And those are going to be your loans, which are going to be the majority of you taking out loans. And then other considerations. When you get into law school, you could still make money and pay off debt. So you don't have to think, oh, this is a be-all, end-all. If I don't get money now, I'm screwed. No, you could do work study. You can do all kinds of things that will really kind of help you out. So I want you to kind of consider that you can get money even after starting law school with no money. Work during the summers, negotiate your funding. These are other things to kind of think about. I didn't negotiate my funding because I didn't get much financial aid during law school at all. So I had to pretty much start taking out debts fairly quickly, loans. But I say that with the proviso that I actually graduated law school with a profit, which is frankly unheard of. And you're going to find out exactly how I did it when you watch part 2 of this series, because I'm going to go through and break it down for you exactly how I did it. So hopefully that you can replicate aspects of it and graduate debt-free so that you give yourselves options after you graduate. All right. And guys, please feel free to note any questions. We've got time. I'm blitzing through this. So we're doing really well on time. I can also go back and elaborate on some areas, but please do ask questions so that we can kind of talk a little bit more about any of the factors. Let me just see if there's anything else I want to kind of add to my notes. Just one thing I remembered here with the resume. I do want you guys to think about measurable results, achievements, not just the responsibilities, but really the achievements. That's really what the schools are going to look for. They want to know where you've flexed leadership, how you've shown analytical thinking, how you've done oratory skills and you flex that, public speaking. They want to see these key qualities of what the law schools look for in your resume, in your materials, in your experiences. Don't just tell them in your application that you have strong speaking skills. You want to showcase it in the resume of where exactly that transpired, like maybe here in public speaking. Interests. Another quick thing I want to note to you is, again, you want to be as specific as possible so that they have an interesting angle. Why? Because a lot of law schools don't do interviews yet. And so this is where they get to know you, at least let's just say your idiosyncrasies outside the scope of your personal statement and so forth, okay? So these are just 2 quick things I want to re-highlight here that are very, very important to think about when putting your resume together. And then also the other factor I want to mention to you was this. Regular decision and regular admission. You're going to learn a little bit more about this in part 2, but I do want to mention this. Early action, okay, is non-binding. And if you apply really early enough and you do a great job at it, then you have a slightly higher chance of admission because you're looked at much earlier in the process. And if you're rejected in early action, oftentimes you could be deferred and put into the regular admission cycle, right? So you get 2 bites at the apple. Don't forget, regular decision is binding, but a lot of schools like I think UCLA, I think Northwestern, I think Boston College, their early decision program allows you then to get financial aid directly from the school. If you get early decision, you're admitted, you can pretty much get a full ride. So they can imagine how minimal spaces there are in that process. And let me see if there's anything else. As you guys know, with the LSAT and your GPA, they will calculate it slightly differently than your GPA out of college. And that's important to note. My GPA out of college was high. It's a 3.93, but after LSAC recalibrated it, it became a 3.96 because I had some A pluses in college. So they gave me a slight extra boost, but it works in the inverse. If you've taken a lot of classes pass, no pass, it could hurt your GPA calculation. So you don't want to do that unless it's absolutely necessary. I think I took 1 pass, no pass class. because I thought I was going to get a B or B minus. So I just said pass, no pass, got the pass, and that was better than getting the B, even though it might have slightly dropped the overall aggregate GPA. So I think that's pretty much it. Let's jump ahead and quickly let you know kind of who we are and why we're qualified to do what we do. So as I said, I've been doing this since 2006. This is our team. The people you see here, the lady on the top got into Stanford Law with the Knight Hennessy Scholarship. The gentleman in the middle got into Harvard's junior deferment program. So he's doing a master's in Oxford right now, but he got into Harvard's junior deferral program. And the gentleman on the bottom got into NYU and is a lawyer out in New York. So you can tell the kind of quality of the people that we have. Really, really high caliber. People have been there, done that. I'm not talking about folks that are, been out of the circuit. I mean, I typically, I graduated, 15 years ago. These guys, have gone through the process last year, the year before. This is all very recent for them and are practicing in some instances, and therefore are very, very familiar with the whole law school process and afterwards, okay? We've had about a 96% success rate. I don't say that into the top 5 law schools or top 10 law schools. That would be ludicrous. Nobody can promise that. But into the top programs, probably the top 50, we've had a really, really high success rate because we really hyper-focus on how to get the best story out of each applicant so that they stand out. We've helped people from all across the world, oddly enough, even for law school, for LLMs and JDs, been around for 16 years, gotten people to all kinds of law schools, upward and counting, 60 programs and counting. And one of the key things that we do that makes this an easier process for you is the fact that we do this in half the time that you would probably do it on your own. Thereby reducing the stress and giving you more time to do things you need to do even for this application process, including taking the LSAT. So that's something that I think that in and of itself is such an important factor, helping you figure out what is your best story, helping you put it down on paper and perfecting it, and then helping you really kind of put the whole process together and submit it without any issues that you may otherwise have if you try to do it on your own. Okay? Let me quickly tell you, part 2, which is super important, is really where all the juice, all the sauce that we're going to give you that we've been working on. First of all, we're going to talk about how to write the best personal statement to really make you stand out. And I think you guys would believe when I tell you, again, when I had a 155, even though I had a high GPA, to get into Berkeley was near impossible. But a lot of it had to do with the story I told. So I think that's super, super important. Okay. In terms of the submissions process, we're going to talk about that, how to put it together, that final mile to submit it and submit it on time and in the best way possible. How to graduate debt-free. I kind of hinted at the fact that we're going to be doing that. And how to succeed at law school. I have the whole formula of how to succeed in law school, which I think you guys are going to want to hear because it really, really allowed me to stand out. I was on law review. I was not only on law review, I was on the board of the law review. I taught classes on the undergrad that helped me pay my debt. I was a student leader. I was a editor-in-chief of a journal on campus. I mean, I did a ton of stuff. So I'm going to give you kind of the secret sauce of how to really succeed in law school to get the best out of it so that you can maximize your career afterwards. And finally, we're going to be talking about the interview prep process and a bunch of other things. So we're going to cover that in the second webinar. So make sure to tune into that. And that, I believe, is going to be on July 5th. And you should be getting an email about that. Okay. The last thing I want to quickly mention, and I want to see if I can open this up for you, is, let me see if I can do this because I think this is worth your while, let's see if I can do this. School is that we have a mastery course. So some of you may say, you know what, I'm not ready to do the application process and to work with you guys. Well, we have something called the Law School Admissions Mastery Course that you will see right here. And what this is essentially I've created and wrote this guidebook that really covers everything about the law school admissions process, from pretty much, am I a good candidate, all the way through to, how to succeed in law school and beyond. So I really want you guys to kind of consider this because it's a great, you may say, hey, we can't work with you, or you know what, we want to learn a little bit more about you guys before we start actually working together, then this is this mastery course, because what we do is we divide it up into a bunch of videos that you can watch that covers a lot of the material we covered today. And it provides you with a pretty in-depth guidebook itself. You can see the different table of contents right there. So you'll have an idea of what we're going to be covering on the in the guidebook itself, so that you can, again, know everything you need to know about the law school admissions process and so forth. And you've already met me, and I could just tell you this, because I did forget to mention, after law school, I started Right Track. I also worked at a series of top law firms before going on to work with the U.S. government doing international development law, and then thereafter going back to grad school at Harvard. And now I focus my full attention on Right Track, as well as working as a lawyer. Okay, so that's a little bit about the course. And the good news is, guys, is the fact that we will be providing you with an opportunity to have the law course and a series of checklists if you attend both webinars. So make sure to attend the second webinar, and you will, and fill out the survey, which you're going to get by email, and then you'll have a chance to get the mastery course for free, as well as the mastery checklist. So again, thank you for those who attended this time. Please make sure to attend next time, which is going to be same time next week, so that we can go through the second part of this series. And I'll quickly answer some questions that we got. Most of the schools on my list do not require a diversity statement. Do you recommend submitting optional statements? Great question. We're going to talk about the diversity statement much more in depth on next week. But the idea here is that, indeed, some of the law schools don't ask for diversity statements, but if you write it, let's put it this way: some schools will, some schools won't. Let's say you're applying to those 10 schools. 5 of them do, 5 of them don't. Why would you not submit the required diversity statement for the schools that don't want it, since you're already going to have written it for the schools that do want it? So I would say yes, double down. And if all the schools don't want it that you're applying to, I would still take the time to write it, because as you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a big part. Even though it's no longer something that they can officially hang their hat on, it is something that is in the calculus of the school, and they want to find any which way to have a diverse class. And therefore, having a diversity statement that is different from the personal statement, that showcases how you're going to add value to the class versus why you want to go to law school, I think is imperative for any applicant. And I definitely did that, and I definitely recommend all our clients do that, and they have, with great results. Second question is, do you have advice for people who might have taken a ton of pass-fail courses? If you've already taken them, no, because the die is cast, right? You're going to get that calculated into your GPA. So what I would advise, obviously, is taking as many classes as you can if you still have the time, taking it for a letter grade and doing the best you possibly can. Obviously, right? That's not much advice to you. Going to be like, tell me something I don't know. That is the reality. But you could also, in the addendum, describe why you did decide to take a lot of classes pass fail. So if you have reasoning behind it and so forth, put that in the addendum, because at least that can explain why your GPA was lowered by LSAT, and it can at least help you kind of offset that in terms of the process itself, in terms of how to kind of overcome that hurdle. Any other questions? Okay, I think we're good. I appreciate everyone for attending. We went pretty quick. We covered a lot of ground, but I want you to kind of think about all these factors as you decide to apply to law school. To me, it was one of the best decisions I've ever made, because it's helped me in so many opportunities in my life, working with the government, being an entrepreneur, leading companies, advising people, policy, all kinds of areas, just being sharper and feeling more empowered. So I really highly recommend that you think about it. You've got the questions that we talked about way in advance right here. Just keep those questions in mind as you go through the process and debating it. And we're here to help you in any which way we can as you go through the process itself. All right. Thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you next week.